Welcome to all of you. My name is Catherine van der Heijden. I will be moderating this session on behalf of Men Engage. I am a proud member of the Men Engage network myself. We are very proud to organize this side event. It's going to be an extremely interesting 1 hour and a half. Let me start by introducing the speakers. So we have Sanam Amin, who's joining us from the Action Nexus on Feminist Economic Justice for People and Planet. And she's actually part in that capacity of the Generation Equality Forum. So those of you who know about the forum that UN Women is organizing, she's part of that. Then we have as a next speaker, Silas Gaya Boschia. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name there. He's the Director General of Gender Promotion and Women Empowerment at the Ministry of Gender and Family Promotion in Rwanda. Welcome very much. And then next we have Sohanu Rahman, whom I personally know because he's a member also of the Men Engage network and active there. He's part of the YouthNet for Climate Justice Fridays for Future Bangladesh, Men Engage Global Working Group on Climate Justice. And then we have Mrs. Lotta Sylwander. Welcome very much. She works for Sida, whom you all know to be the Development Cooperation Organization in Stockholm, Sweden. And she is the lead policy specialist at Gender. And then our last speaker is Vidar Vettervalk. He's also part of the Men Engage Global Working Group for Climate Justice. And he works for the organization Men in Sweden, an organization who's really specialized in men and masculinity. So thank you very much. So my own name is Catherine van der Heijden. I'm the facilitator today. Just like Vidar and so on, I'm part of the Men Engage Working Group on Climate and Masculinity. And it's a delight to be here today together with all of you. And we thought, since it is such a rare opportunity nowadays with everything happening in the world, that we succeed of bringing people together from so many continents to talk together, we think it's important that we just take a minute to catch our breath, because we're in a period of big turmoil. It's a difficult period for many people on this planet right now. And we want to start by opening our hearts towards them. So we're going to take just a couple of minutes to get our breath and get into the right mood to jointly do this session together. So just follow my voice here. It's just going to take a couple of minutes. And I want to say, start by taking a really deep breath. The world is in turmoil. Not only wars are ongoing this very moment, but also bushfires, flooding, droughts. We are in the midst of global change, and taking a breath once in a while is really crucial. This is why I want to invite you all to take a deep breath, close your eyes for just a few minutes. Find your balance. Look at the center of your body and visualize a sunny, safe space around it. And all the while, keep breathing. Oxygen in, oxygen out, oxygen that connects you with the atmosphere of this planet, that connects you with every other place on this planet. Now, reach out to the rest of the world, as if your feet would grow roots and your arms can reach up to the sky. Keep on breathing the oxygen while feeling connected to all. We might not be able to solve all the problems in the world, but we do have love, and love grows when it is shared. Now visualize your love and your care for this planet and visualize how it grows. The earth is ours to love, for now and every day. Thank you for joining this exercise. I hope you can hold on to this warm feeling of connection throughout the entire session and share it with all. And you can open your eyes now, and we're going to get going. Thank you for participating in the exercise. Okay, so I've just introduced the speakers of today, and it's a very distinguished panel. We're so happy to have them with us. What we want to do in this session today is to unpack the links between the climate crisis and patriarchy, but also wider, the gender norms, engaging men, which is crucially important, and transforming masculinities, and how man can be allies to women and girls in this world. All of them are crucial topics, and specifically with CSW focusing on climate and gender, we think we can have a profound contribution on looking at the masculinity lens. Now, how we are going to work is that all the panelists get 5 minutes in a first round with a first question. Then I'm going to quickly summarize and give you the chance to ask a couple of questions. Now, if you have any questions, then I would like you to write them in the chat. And I cannot promise that we will be able to tackle every question, but I'll try to do my best to get as many reply to as possible. Then we do a second round with a second set of questions, and then we have a 1 minute takeaway that each panelist can give us. So the first question that we will be tackling on the panel is the following. Can you say something about how patriarchal structures and masculinity and climate change are interlinked with each other, and maybe also with other crises going on in the world? And the first person to talk in the first panel now is Sohanur Rahman. So please, Sohanur, I give the word for you, and I'm going to be a very ruthless timekeeper. I'm sorry for that. So I'll interrupt you in 5 minutes time.
It looks like we lost Sohan's internet connection, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Yes. Sometimes it happens. Being in Bangladesh, he at times has problems. Then I suggest we go to the second speaker and hope that Sohanur joins us really quickly again. The second speaker is Sanam Amin. So please, Sanam, I give the word to you.
Thank you so much. And what a beautiful opening to sort of breathe and ground ourselves. I think it's such a useful and needed reminder, because in preparation for today's event, I was looking, of course, at the most recent IPCC report, but that also reminded me to look back. And the first IPCC report on human-caused climate change dates to 1990. So we are talking about over 30 years of warnings that we have seen that we are causing change in our natural environment, and that this change is dangerous to us. And while I'm not based in Bangladesh at the moment, I also am from Bangladesh, and this is something that has been a reality for us my whole adult life. And I think to illustrate what are the links with patriarchy, I would say that I just want to give a couple of quick examples to keep to the strict 5 minutes. The first is to sort of remind ourselves that patriarchy as a structure, which of course interlinks with other structures of class and race and other structures of power that marginalize different groups, has been in place for a very long time. And it cooperates with capitalism, with the neoliberal order that is extractive, that is exploitative, that tries to just gain profit over and over and accumulate it as much as possible. And it is this hurtful process that is both hurting us across genders as well as hurting our planet, because the extraction is what is absolutely damaging the environment in terms of the fossil fuel industry, in terms of mining, and just this total lack of counting the effects that and the damage that we've done over generations. norms. But at the same time, this is something that we've seen within patriarchy as well, because patriarchy assumes the labor of women and gendered minorities. And it does not count the value that care offers to us. It is not counted in our GDP, even though that's the figure that is touted for us to measure our economy. Yet, as we have seen in this pandemic, we fall apart if we do not have care. It is women who are center to the care that is offered to us. It is 70%, women are 70% of the healthcare workforce that have been saving our lives throughout this pandemic. They are the ones who have been holding the line at home when it comes to both childcare and elder care, through lockdowns, through shutdowns of schools, through shutdowns of all the essential services and infrastructure that we need. In the Bangladeshi context, I think we see that very, very sadly, the child marriage rate has gone up as the country has seen devastation, because we've lived through multiple cyclones. We are going through coastal degradation and loss of land. We are going through increased salinity and loss of traditional livelihood in terms of agriculture. And that has driven people into poverty, that has driven people to migration. This migration has always made women and girls and gendered minorities more vulnerable. And this is where we see that peak in child marriage. And I think this is something that shows us how we have to fight this, both from terms of patriarchy and cultural norms, as well as from the science, from understanding what we need to change about our environment. Because when people make that decision, they are not doing that out of vengeance or evil. It is certainly out of a need to try and secure a home, secure a food for their child. And that is how they make that compromise to have their children married off. And this is something that takes action on multiple fronts, and that's why I think we need to combat it together. The second example, and I just need one more minute and I hand back the floor to you, is when Bangladesh was developing its proposal for the Green Climate Fund, one of the one of the actions that the money was supposed to fund was to make it easier for women to collect water. And women collecting water is something that, of course, as we've talked about, the increased droughts, the increased salinity and so on, is something that is more and more difficult for women to do. And I remember sitting in that meeting and saying, but this is not gender transformative. We do not need a uterus to collect water. We need to change the responsibility and say water is something we all need, and water is something we all need to collect as a community together. That is not just women and girls' responsibility. So with those 2 points coming from my country, I just wanted to open up the discussion here today about how deeply interconnected climate justice and gender justice and addressing patriarchy as well as economic justice is for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for trying to fit such a fantastic, beautiful message into just the 5 minutes. That's great. I want to go back. So, okay, Sohanur hasn't joined yet. Then I would like to give the word to Vidar Vettervalk, the next 5 minutes, and they are starting now, Vidar.
Thank you very much. And I want to share my screen. Some of you have seen this before, and maybe for some it's new. So this is from research on the links between masculinity and the climate crisis, and also from our practical work with groups of men. And so there are 3 different categories, where the 2 first ones are really categories of masculinities, whereas the third one, the ecological, is actually moving beyond masculinities and beyond the binaries. So the links here and how these things are connected, one way to answer that is to say that patriarchy and patriarchal masculinities are root causes for the climate crisis, as have already been described. It's together with colonialism and racism and capitalism and all of that, and maybe we can always move these different things in relation to each other, but a lot of research shows that patriarchy is really at the bottom and at the root of all those things. Because two of the main patriarchal principles are that the one is to keep things apart. Men and women are different and they are separate. Humans and nature are different and separate, and they're not just separated, they're also put above and under each other. So the one over can dominate and exploit what is under. And yeah, and that's the patriarchal principles, which are also the principles that makes colonialism and racism and sexism and all of that possible. And here, what the research from Martin Hultman and Paul Poulet does is to both talk about industrial breadwinner masculinities, the black triangle there, which is one egological system, patriarchal system, where, yeah, and it's very simplified. These illustrations are just very simplified. There is, of course, a lot of different men on different positions in this whole hierarchy, and women and animals and all of that. But right now it's just one man at the top, and then woman, and then animals. And here are the climate deniers. Here are the ones viewing Earth and humans as something we can just exploit and use for our egoistic purposes. There is no limits, there is eternal growth, there is no problems. Business as usual. What they also separate out is the eco-modern masculinities, which is really interesting because we can use this when we look at what we are trying to do and what our governments and different organizations and companies are trying to do when they start to actually admit and see that there is a climate crisis, there is an environmental crisis, and we need to do something about it. And they come up with different solutions, but they are eco-modern solutions. They are kind of trying to do quick fixes with many times technical solutions, which in itself is a masculine kind of thing, to come up with quick solutions. If we have electric cars and wind power and solar power, then everything is fixed, and we can just go on with business as usual. So it's not changing or challenging the patriarchal system at all. It's not system change. It's just a greener version of the same ego-logical system. And
okay,
then we have
10 more seconds.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Now, so we can come back to the ecological when we look at solutions and what can be done. So we can actually stop right there. It's how we view ourselves, how we view the world, how we view us as humans, and that whole view on the world and ourselves is an important root cause to all the problems and crises we are in the middle of.
Thank you very much, Vidar, for sharing that. If you can stop sharing your screen, we can see each other again. And then I would like to see if Sohanur has already arrived. Are you here, Sohanur? Or still struggling to get on board? No, I don't get any answer. Then we go to the next speaker, which will be Lotta Sylwander. Please, Mrs. Sylwander. You have your 5 minutes, yes.
Thanks very much. So I'm not going to base my comments on any nice report or not even theories or deep research. Rather, I'm going to base it on my own experience and what I've seen happening in some of the biggest environmental or climate disasters in the world. And I was actually present in the Philippines when, the biggest typhoon ever, strongest typhoon ever hit the Philippines at the end of 2013. And what transpired there was very much along the lines of masculinity and femininity and the sort of reaction of men and women being almost scripted in the way that it happened. So, as you know, that typhoon basically wiped out a number of communities. And the whole world rushed to help, as they are rushing now to help Ukraine for other reasons. The first ones to get in were what I would call the male emergency cowboys, who are primarily interested in coming and working on getting things right. Things meaning material things, everything tangible, whether it's water, buildings, roads, etc. And long after that comes the other aid workers, those who actually work with traumas, those who work with women and children, and of course men as well, but you know, working on the sort of emotional side of a traumatic experience like that. And I was actually talking to Vidar and describing how I met the mayor of the first town that was hit by the typhoon. It's called Gyan. It's very flat and it was basically obliterated. And the mayor there was a man, and I still believe is there, really tried his best to protect his people, but he had no idea that a 7-meter high wave was going to hit the town. And so in one of the schools that he had encouraged people to go, about 50 people died or drowned because they were trapped in the school. And he just could not get over this. He was so devastated by this. The fact that he had advised them to go there, the fact that he couldn't protect them, the fact that they were completely helpless and vulnerable. And even a year after that, and I believe still probably, he blames himself. And we're talking about changing the male norms. I think this experience deeply changed him because he said, no one should trust me anymore. I don't know how to give advice. The women told me we shouldn't go to the school because it was lying too low. I didn't listen to them. So in capturing emotions, realizations like that among men and among men who really hold, what can I say, roles within the patriarchal structures, I think is vital, but also to reveal the structures of those who step into disasters like this. But then, of course, what happens afterwards? Who are the ones replanting the palm trees, rearranging the rice terraces? Or who are the who find other crops, for example, to plant when there's too much rain or too little rain or there's salt infiltration? Well, I can say, and there I base my statement on research, it is women who primarily find the adaptation, ways of adapting to climate change. Why are men not doing that? Well, they basically base their adaptations approach on finding new commercial venues in adapting. And so then starting to plant or starting to have, shrimps or prawns, which is certainly not an environmentally friendly business, but yes, they can take salt water. So things like that women tend to have a wider scope and be more sensitive to the environment and to how their enterprises or endeavors will affect their family, both in the short term, but also very much in the long term, because they have the history. And also because they do tend the land. The men might own the land. They might decide what to plant and when to plant, but they do not understand the consequences of what has happened among the community when these decisions actually are taking place. So I'm going to leave it now. Thank you.
Yes. I was. Thank you very much. Beautiful that you have this concrete example and lived experience that you want to share with us. That's fantastic. And then I want to check if Sohanur has joined us in the meantime. That's fantastic. So please, Sohanur, we give the word to you.
Thank you, Katrin,
Yes.
moderator, and all panelists of this side event. So I want to mention that the climate crisis is a symptom. It's a symptom, and it's rooted with the colonialism, capitalism, and destructive masculinity, especially is domination. And currently, the world is dominated by the men. Like if you can see the G7, G20, all the leaders are men. So the crisis, like the climate crisis or economic crisis or where all are fueled by the men's domination. And all are interlinked. Like if we want to focus on the obviously gender justice, climate justice, racial justice, economic justice, wider social justice. So all are interlinked. So to break or to dismantle or to transform this patriarchal system, uproot this system, we need more women leadership in the decision-making table, also girls in the decision-making table. And we are in now compound crisis or multiple crises with the multiplex aspect. So without women's leadership, without women as a part of the solution of this crisis, we cannot tackle this crisis. And there is women, and all time we are talking about the women at the vulnerable, victim, but women's also early adapter, women's also early responder, women's also a leader in the community level. In Bangladesh, many women and girls in the front line to tackling climate crisis by taking adaptation measures, by taking mitigation measures. So they are not the real cause for this crisis. They are facing many disasters, but they are using clean cook stove. They are using the renewable energy, like a solar home system also. So they are part of still they are part of the solution, but the recognition, their participation is tokenism is not enough. Need the meaningful participation, and it's time to talk about not only meaningful participation, also the leadership, ownership, partnership at all levels, from grassroots to national to global level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sohanur, and we're very happy that you managed to get on board and be here with us. Good. Okay, and then we turn to the last speaker from Rwanda, Silas. Please, I give the word to you.
Thank you very much. And before maybe I respond to the question, but it's also part of it, I would say that in Rwanda, gender, environment, and climate change are cross-cutting themes into the planning and budgeting, and this is by the law. And coming back to the questions, the government of Rwanda believes believes that there are multiple ways in which patriarchal gender order and the social construction of masculinities and femininities unequally shaping our societies, unequally shaping manhood and womanhood that are linked with the climate change. And that's this in the way we climate change affects us, in the way we contribute to it, but also in the way we respond when disasters occurred. If I may start by the way climate change affects us, we are all aware that evidences revealed that effects of climate change and environmental degradation are especially negatively affecting women's lives more than men, and particularly those women in low income status. And we know that in countries where there is marked gender inequalities, 4 times as many women and as men die in floods. And this is true for Rwanda because looking at our geomorphology, the likelihood of floods and landslides is also high in our country. And during natural disasters, women and children are 14 times more likely to die than men. So, and unfortunately, this phenomenon is likely to grow more frequent with global warming. And on the second one, on the way climate change, we respond to climate change differently. Our country has ratified different international instruments, but also has put in place laws, strategies, a legal and institutional framework. But still, in some cases, you can see that men might resist proposed adaptation measures when they feel they threaten, these measures threaten their masculinity, like switching from cattle keeping to planting trees, for instance. And in other cases, women face gendered barriers to participate to decision-making in every patriarchal society. Policy making and programs that promote climate change adaptation. And in particular, we are all aware in my country, and so my country, the extent to which unpaid care work is still seen as women's and girls' natural task. And unpaid care work, we know how it is contributing to damaging or climate change or causing disasters. And on the third element of how we contribute, human beings contribute to climate change, women and men, of course, contribute differently to climate change, and the patterns of consumption are deeply gendered. Women often have a smaller carbon footprint than men, for instance, and regardless of whether they are rich or poor, and men tend to consume more meat, while it is known that plant-based diets are more sustainable. So more traditional forms of masculinities are normally associated with less sustainable practices of farming the land. So with men being socialized to being aggressive, willing to aggressively produce more. So the likelihood of damaging or climate patterns is very high with masculinities than with femininities. So briefly, I believe it is important to highlight that such differences are not inborn or natural. Climate change happens in a world characterized by socially constructed deep inequalities. And if we need to address it, we really need to address even gender inequalities. And among those inequalities, the patriarchal gendered order is really predominant. And this means that women are not the most affected by disaster or climate change because they are naturally weaker. And instead, it is the masculinities nor men. Men also were not born evil polluters or greedily exploiters of natural resources. Instead, it is the socialization, it is the masculinities and femininities women and men are socialized into that influence their responsibilities and the degree to which they contribute to climate change. So the way they are affected by it, as well as the way they can address it. So briefly, I think in those three ways, it can best describe how patriarchy is really closely linked to climate change, but also other crises and other critical periods or situations. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. And thank you to all the speakers for everything wonderful that you shared. I now have 5 minutes to sort of summarize all this, which is really quite a difficult task for me to do. I want to thank Amin for talking about the capitalist structures and bringing that into the picture, and talking about extraction as destruction, which was a very important point. Also, the total lack of counting effects of climate on the climate of the extraction that we do, and then making the link towards patriarchy, which is also not counting the effects of the fact that they are treating women so unequally, which was really nice. Also, Vidar, thank you for showing us that nice design. A picture often says more than 1,000 words of how often men are disconnected from nature and have to find their place within nature again, restore the connection. Lotta Sylwander, who gave a fantastic testimony about the typhoon in Bangladesh and talking about the male emergency cowboys, but then also about the shame and guilt that some of the men feel about decisions they took and how they want to have lessons learned and do it differently next time. So Hanul, thank you very much for pointing out the vulnerable position of victims. That was wonderful. You're very strong at doing that and really giving a voice to those people who do not cause the problem, but who are victims of the problem in so many ways. And then last but not least, it was very interesting, Silas, to hear that gender and environment are cross-cutting by law in Rwanda, which if you have a legal framework, obviously you have a lot of leeway to move and to actually do things. And with having just said that, Silas, I want to give a question to you that came in the chat in the meantime, and then before we go to the next round. And the question is, how are rural women who are more likely to be affected by climate-related disasters and weather conditions? So how are these rural women targeted and involved in climate adaptation and mitigation in Rwanda? So Silas, if you could reply to that question, please, that would be lovely.
Maybe to respond to that question, I should come back to the institutionalization of climate change, the environment and climate change and gender, and the cross-cutting nature of it. Because in Rwanda, if I'm saying it is by the law, it is the design even of a single activity. It's not only about those big projects, but also by designing a single activity, a single intervention, everyone has to prove or to prove how he or she has taken into account the mainstreaming of environment and climate change and gender into that activity. And that exercise there is accountability around that. So for rural women, by rural women, I just wanted to say that, of course, among women, the intersectionality aspect of it, when we are designing an intervention for rural women, so we have to start by an analysis of the situation, as everyone does, I think, and then make that analysis on the way this will affect first of all, how do they contribute to climate change? How do they contribute in terms of causing, if I may say, causing a disaster or any, the transformation of climate patterns? And secondly, how are they affected? How are they likely to be affected by what we are doing, but also how we are going to conduct that intervention, be it an intervention that is contributing maybe to improving the status of women and the men in that rural area, and thirdly, how that being affected by that will change their lives. So it's simply not globalizing, be it an intervention, be it a response to a given disaster or any climate change problem, but being very specific to a given area or a given situation you are going to be addressing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we turn now to the second round, I would like to take quickly the opportunity to also mention that we organized with the Men Engage Network the Ubuntu seminar, which was really a very big worldwide event, a conference that took a whole year. And within this broader Ubuntu conference, we organized 7 seminars on masculinity and climate change specifically. If you go to the Men Engage website, you can re-watch these 7 seminars because they were recorded. And based on these seminars, we also published recently a paper on masculinity and climate change. So I would like to ask my colleague Bianca to actually share the link to the Ubuntu seminars and the paper in the chat so that all of you can click on it who are interested and take these resources down to take a look at it afterwards. Okay, and then we turn to the second round in this panel. And again, we have the same panelists, but this time the question is the following. In what way is climate justice as gender justice? Do you have ideas on how to transform masculinities so men become accountable allies in the system change and climate justice movement? So this is really turning towards the ideas, the solutions. What can we do? How can we turn the men in our lives into allies for the climate justice movement? And this time, we're going to start in the reverse order. So again, I would like to ask our panelists from Rwanda to take the word again for the first time and to start with 5 minutes.
Thank you once again. I would like to start again by sharing about what our policy, because we've been having a gender policy from 2010, and now it has been revised last year and approved by the cabinet in February last year. And our gender policy, among 8 objectives, one of them is specifically targeting engaging men and boys in the promotion of gender equality at large and the transformation of masculinity. And we are now working out on a men engaged strategy, a national men engaged strategy, yes, to be specific on how we will go about implementing that component of engaging men and transforming masculinities. So for Rwanda, the question itself mentions the importance of transformation, and when that policy and the cross-cutting nature of both environment and climate change and gender invites or dictates, I would say dictates us to go beyond just providing gender-sensitive responses to climate change such as, for instance, tailoring programs and interventions to promote climate resilient agriculture, whereby new techniques for sustainable farming are taught to women as the main subsistence farmers. A gender-sensitive response is already good, and we have enjoyed it. We've achieved a lot with it, but also it can be good enough in many cases. But the new policy is now telling us to go beyond and deeply question the social norms that relegate women in the field of subsistence agriculture, nor does it really touch the burden of unpaid care work. So even now we are in Accountability Day in one of the districts addressing that. So this could prevent the most vulnerable women from consistently attending or being locked into the unpaid care work. And how do we make sure that we go beyond being gender sensitive and start being gender transformative? So we start by doing the analysis of masculinities and femininities and the structures of power, as we had said previously, and the way they are socially constructed, and then making sure that interventions that are tailored by everyone, and the policies saying public institutions, private sector, and civil society, and everyone is contributing to challenging and deconstructing harmful or negative masculinities. To do so, the very first step is that men and boys have to be engaged alongside women and girls in all policies, because it is cross-cutting. If it is a men engaged strategy, it's not only for gender or what, it is in all policies, programs, interventions, and in order to holistically promote gender equality at large, and specifically gender and climate change. And with the revised gender policy, again, it emphasizes the importance of also engaging the civil, the private sector, because it has been seen as a gap, and effectively to engage men. It's more about manhood than men as individual, and to make them embark on a transformative journey where they are invited to reflect about the root causes of gender inequality, mainly the gender and equal social norms, and understand the damage that gender inequality and the rigid constructions of masculinity and femininity does to women in the first place, but also to themselves, because we are also aware of stressing on male benefits. What do men benefit from that transformation? So it is therefore, I think Rwanda is well aware that each intervention regarding climate change prevention and response should also integrate a more long-term gender transformative approach alongside a short and mid-term emergency response when needed. So we deeply recommend that men and boys alongside women and girls should also be engaged within a transformative approach in order to promote a more gender just society and a sustainable change. And coming back to this to the private sector, we start by also analyzing the gains private sector federation will make by mainstreaming gender, but also addressing negative effects of patriarchy. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing all these very interesting points. Then I will turn to the next speaker, Mrs. Lotta Sylwander from Sida, please.
Thank you. I've had a little problem with my bandwidth, so I hope it's not going to be a problem now. So the questions was about climate justice and gender justice, and of course, to me, it's one and the same in many ways, because you know, everyone should be given the same rights, the same opportunities, the same available resources, the same opportunities to choose, etc., etc. Whether you're man, woman, or you identify somewhere in another way. But what happens is, and this is a discussion that's ongoing, is now that many are talking about being compensated for climate change and the disasters that are coming and so on. And of course, there's no agreement, as far as I know, on how this kind of compensation could be done. But what I fear is that climate justice being pushed in the way of compensation is that compensation is going to be labeled by the tangible things. The destroyed fields, the houses that have been flooded, the roads that have been disappearing, etc., etc. But the question and the issue that I've never heard is, how do we possibly compensate for the untangible or non-tangible things, which women are, of course, involved in and engaged in mostly. And here, of course, I'm thinking about the care culture or the care burden of women, the unpaid work that they do at home, the health work that they often engage in, the teaching work that they often do, the whole emotional support system that women in most communities engage in day in and day out. How is compensation going to be given to them for all the time, the effort and emotions, extra emotions that they have to put in because of climate change? So here, climate justice is, that discussion, I think, is still very male-centered. And the discussion is taken from a patriarchal standpoint and assumes, as someone said it, I think it was maybe Catherine who said, patriarchy assumes the work of women, but it doesn't assume that the work of women can be compensated. And so I would call for the whole climate justice discourse to change direction and have a much more non-tangible elements in that discussion, because that's when we really hit the core of matters. And the difficulty here is not whether northern nations should compensate southern nations. We'll get over that actual subject, which is also patriarchal in many ways. But what we really need to discuss, how do we compensate for the non-tangible, which is in many ways the biggest burden. But of course, I mean, we are dealing with really sensitive natural losses that all of us emotionally and take away sensitivities from us that we cannot actually live without. So I would like to reshape that discussion, and I hand it over to the meeting to continue that discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you bring in an incredibly valuable element, the intangible element, the invisibility of all the work that women very often do, and how do we deal with that? Thank you very much. Vidar Vettervalk, you are the next speaker for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much, everyone. I will link on to what you shared, Lotta, and I will do it again with sharing my screen. in our work with men and the connection with the climate crisis, and the women, the violence against women, and all of that, we look at the ecological order. How can we? So one thing is to become aware of all the root causes of the problems, and these male constructed orders, ecological orders, patriarchy, and then to move into eco logics, and from patriarchy to partnership. And this is all about care. It's all about abundance. It's all about abundance of our real needs, whereas the other orders is very much about constructed needs to make us consume as much as possible. But here, and women traditionally are more linked and in contact, in touch, in relation with the care, with the relationships between humans and with the earth and everything, and taking care of that. And men need to connect as well, and the masculinity norms are in the way for that. So we need to become aware of how they are blocking us from that, and then go into, and thank you so much, Katrine, for the exercise in the beginning. That's very much what transforming masculinity norms is about. It's to connect, get in touch and contact, and connect to what we are really needing and what we are really longing for. And there we have the caring capacities and the loving capacities, the ability to cry when we realize we have done wrong, the ability to listen to the women who know a lot of the things that are needed here. And that is really to change masculinity norms. And I just want to share that we've developed a material that we use to do these kind of reflections and help men to connect. This is so far very much on an individual level and with groups of individual men, but we've also done it with parliamentarian men in the parliament and so on. So individuals are everywhere, also in the structures, and we need to work with both the structures and the personal and the individual and how that's linked. And this guide is available in English and Russian and Swedish right now, and it can be translated into others, and it can be adapted to the local context and so on. So please let us know if you're interested in that in any way. I want to share one quote when Robin Hedenquist did research in in-depth interviews with participants in these groups. And this is one quote and one actually summary from him on what has been important results from men participating in these groups. To feel part of something simply makes it harder to dominate and easier to care. And that is exactly what patriarchy and patriarchal masculinity norms do. It's to cut us away from this being part of something and telling us that we should dominate and exploit instead of being part of and be in the ecological order, where we are one ecosystem. We're not apart from it. We are in it. So that's one important part. And the other part that is also important is, of course, the laws and the things that can change the impunity of the men in power. Because the impunity is so much there. And one of the things that Fridays for Future are pushing for, and that Men Engage Alliance is supporting and standing behind and also driving, is the demand to make ecocide an international crime, and the law, the rights of nature. That will change the whole paradigm of patriarchy, where we can just use it. It has to have its rights, and when the men with impunity just exploiting the nature and humans, when there are laws and punishments, and all the investors and everyone realize that that there will be punishments, then things can also change. So we need to work from both sides, both connecting with the longing that is in the depth of every man, and support that and find ways to support that connection. And then at the same time, of course, work with all the legislations and laws and structures. And there's a lot of those, and we also stand behind the feminist movement for climate justice, and these 7 points, they're all in our call for action for the CSW. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Vidar. Unfortunately, time is up. We need to turn to the next panelist, which is Sohanur Rahman. So we move from Sweden to Bangladesh. Sohanur, please.
Yes, thank you. And Greta Thunberg from Sweden started Fridays for Future movement, and we express solidarity as an active ally of the Greta Thunberg. So we are still ally is the women's-led or girls-led climate movement, and women's also in the front line, first one. Second one is I was started my activism in my childhood, and I witnessed the super cyclone fueled by climate crisis. And I can mention me, or I can, as a climate victim, as climate anxiety and trauma. So, but when I visited another area where women are mostly affected, but they have no action for this changing climate. So it's make me a push for climate justice. And Lotta already mentioned about compensation, but we are urging the reparation. But the global north there is not providing enough financing for reparation, and all non-negotiable things cannot be repaired or cannot be compensated also. So climate change, climate justice, and gender justice is vice versa. So we cannot achieve climate justice without gender justice, and we cannot achieve gender justice without climate justice. And already Bangladesh, men are as an ally, they are supporting women to collecting water, because climate crisis is also water crisis. So in climate affected area, men are playing their role. Also in the household work, to sharing work, or also the supporting to agriculture field to women. But we need more support as a man to support women for our joint effort. So I have a small message to the men for the transforming masculinity. And I think the narrative must be deconstructed, decolonized, and more caring humanity builds in its state. As such, transformation means radical system change. Patriarchal forms of masculinity play in perpetuating social and environmental injustice. The man-made climate crisis is killing Mother Earth and women, having power over others, including other men, over women, over children, and over nature. These are some of the harmful expectations that shape manhood. And last COP26, I was attended COP26. Tunisia raised a point in the negotiation table. Its gender not should be mentioned as a women. So LGBTQI people and other intersectional gender identities should be or treat be as a gender. But Russia stopped the total discussion, and that was stopped or concluded there. So, and also gender action plan. So we have to also think about girls, women, transgender, and LGBTQI people. So political complacency, delay, and excuse must be seen for what their gross failure of leadership and tragic failure for humanity and all life on the earth. And we have to be challenged the global scale and transformed in harmony with other efforts of feminist system change. My message to the young people, especially boys and men, is simple. Don't dominate the Mother Earth and women. Don't destroy the ecosystem and your only home by playing your harmful manhood role. Toxic attitude to nature, eating meats, environmental distraction are not real manhood. Real manhood is the caring climate, conserving the ecosystem, and respecting women and other gender identities as human beings. Be an ally, break the patriarchal world, and save the Mother Earth. Thank you. Over to you, Katrin.
Thank you very much. Save Mother Earth. Yes, I think it's a message for both men and women and any other human in this room. Thank you so much, Sohanur. And then I turn to the last panelist, which was the first one in the first round, but this time the last one. Sanam Amin, please, I give the word to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Katrine. I think the wonderful thing about following as the last one answering this question is that everybody has said a lot of the key points, and we are so strongly in agreement about what is needed in terms of action that I think I just highlight and add a few more elements as we draw close to our conversation today. Of course, you know, Lotta and others have talked about compensation, and Sylwander has talked about reparations. And I think this is something that needs to be ongoing. We need to be in two tracks. One is that we need to acknowledge the historic responsibility for climate change, and also just for the greater sort of harms that patriarchy has done, that imperialism has done, right? The mining, the fossil fuel extraction has largely come from the global south. Even till today, the same railroads, the same mines, the same ports, they are still using the infrastructure set up by the European empire. Think about ExxonMobil, think about Shell, think about BP. These are colonial companies, and they are holding on to their land assets that were awarded to them in colonial eras. And they also hold on to these contracts saying that, oh, this contract was valid before you put this environmental protection in place, before you put this recognition of indigenous people in place. So I think the first answer I would say to the question of, you know, what we can be doing is conversations like this, because you know, rather than the multi-stakeholderism, which I think is problematic for us because it allows corporate power to dominate too much, is this type of work that we're doing, where it brings together civil society, where it brings together people in government like Silas, people who are working with, Lotta, who is working with a development agency that has been a strong feminist sort of bulwark over the years to civil society and feminist movements around the world, and sort of making sure that we are supporting each other and having conversations together about what we need to be doing. Because the big element to undoing corporate power is transparency. We need to know what is going on, why there are 503 fossil fuel lobbyists at COP26 while civil society is being left outside. And that historical conversation, I think, is also very important for us to really center marginalized communities, as Sylwander has mentioned, gender minorities. And I think I take this moment to also acknowledge indigenous people, and in settler countries where there is a very strong land back demand. And acknowledging also that ecological activism in the past has sometimes created national parks and gated territories that has left out indigenous people, who are actually custodians of our land, as we've been speaking of. 70% of our biodiversity has been protected by indigenous people. So these are the communities that have been put on the sidelines, but have been putting their labor and their care for protecting our planet. And let me just say that the planet, even if we set this whole thing on fire, which it seems that the oil companies are trying very hard to do so with spill after spill and so on, it's going to still keep spinning around the sun, and the Milky Way is going to keep going even after we are all gone. What I would say is that we need to keep working together to undo the harms of patriarchy and of capitalism and extractivism to ourselves, to save ourselves, because we will not survive this. It is we can pretend that 1 or 2 billionaires are going to colonize Mars, but that's not real. That's not going to be the humanity that we have grown and loved, and the communities of care that we want to visualize for ourselves. And this is, I think, what I want to leave with, keeping to time, hopefully, that we need to, as many have said already, really think about care at the center of everything, because profit is not going to get us there. Care and justice and sharing of power, not just wealth and resources, is what is going to get us there. And that is why I said transparency is important. We need to know what money is being paid to whom. And I say that within a company, within wages, so that we know that what is the gender pay gap, what is the racial pay gap, but we also need to know what taxes are being paid or not paid. We also need to know what money is going into elections and manipulation, and why the fossil fuel companies have so much power to conflate strange ideas like clean coal, which is not a real option for us, and instead use our alliances and our partnerships with ally governments that have that are ready to listen to us, to talk about energy democracy, to make sure that when we talk about bringing energy to communities, and I remind you that almost 1 billion people live without electricity, let alone talking about even the gaps of internet in rural communities. So this type of conversations is not inclusive enough for us. This is the work that we need to do, where communities can manage their resources and energies and be connected to each other in the way that we are doing today. So thank you so much for listening to me and giving me the chance to wrap up.
Thank you. That's great. Fantastic. Again, in the second round, such richness in all of the things that have been said and shared here. I want to thank you, Saman Amin, for acknowledging the historic responsibilities and bringing that into the picture. Exactly like you say, colonial companies still rule the world, and we should question that. And it aligns perfectly well with what Sylwander was saying, that there is not enough payment for reparation, and that the narrative itself must be decolonized. I think he was exactly with you on the same page. Vidar took it a step further with his call to action. I thank you very much, Vidar, for sharing that. And maybe you can share the link to the call to action also in the chat, so that people can click and look at the document, because action is absolutely needed. Then Lotta Sylwander brought in the untangible elements. She brought into view how all the work of women that women do is so often completely invisible. And if we do not visualize it and make it part of the narrative, part of the story, we will never really get to gender equality. And then Silas, thank you for telling so much about the Rwandan policy. Fantastic to hear it's been in place since 2010. And I think you ended with a very interesting question also on to point out, how do men benefit from the transformation? Because obviously this is a very interesting way of getting them on board, is also showing how they can profit from the transformation and how it can be really interesting for them. So we're going to have a couple of minutes for some questions. Maybe this could be a question: how can man profit from this? But there was also another question in the chat which might be interesting to look at, and this was Sarah, who was asking about the role of parliamentarians. So Sarah said, what actions can parliamentarians take to ensure gender equality in climate action? I open up the floor to any of the panelists who would like to reply to this question. So the role of the parliamentarians. Yes, Amin, please.
So I think parliamentarians and generally the legislative branch of government is so important, because it is about the checks and balances system. It is about keeping democracy accountable. Earlier, Vidar had shared the feminist demands for feminist decolonial Green New Deal. And part of that has been to redistribute wealth and resources and restructure the global trade system and end sovereign debt crisis. So it depends country to country, of course, whether you're the country that is facing the crushing of debt, which is the case of small countries, developing countries, small island nations, or whether you're a global north countries. But either way, the legislative role is pretty clear. You need to be the one saying that, no, the government doesn't get to agree to a new loan or a new debt, or doesn't get to force another country into a loan or a debt that is going to cripple them. Instead, we need the parliamentarians in the global north to be demanding cancellation of debt. This is not something that is going to help us address these multiple crises, which is this global pandemic, this climate crisis, and the increased conflict that we're seeing worldwide, not just in Ukraine, but in many other contexts as well. We also need our parliamentarians to, again, like I said, bring transparency to global trade agreements. And let me just give a little bit of information on that point, which is that these global trade agreements lock countries into systems of trade, complex trade rules for 30 years or more. And this is not, I think, feasible for a government that is elected for 4 or 5 years to be signing away and trapping their country into conditions that can be detrimental in the future. We know very well that the North American Free Trade Agreement, for example, between Canada, America, and Mexico actually blocked environmental protection because companies consistently use the protections of NAFTA to block environmental legislation, saying that it will threaten their profit. So that governments are the ones that sign these contracts, but there's no way that legislatures should ever let them get away with it. And every time any government goes into a negotiation for a trade agreement, your member of parliament should be asking what is in that agreement, publish it, have a public consultation, show us what you're doing, show us what you're trapping our country into. And I think those are two very important roles that our parliamentarians and general legislative branch of government can play.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. Sohanur, you raised your hand. Let's do it quickly because I want a second question to be answered as well. So, but please, Sohanur,
okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the floor. So parliamentarians has a crucial roles, and the grassroots women, they are not voiceless or they are not powerless, but we are not hearing in the national or international dialogues or negotiation. So we, YouthNet for Climate Justice in Bangladesh, we build partnership with parliamentarians. It's named Climate Parliament Bangladesh with the 25 parliamentarians. And we brought the parliamentarians in the grassroots and we fostered dialogue with the grassroots women. But in the formal consultation in district level administration, we found only one women representation around the 100 participants. So gender and youth is not mainstreamed right now, but we brought the parliamentarians in the ground. And by this consultation, we developed a report, it's named Climate Parliament Report. And we brought this parliament report in the COP26 and we shared this. And as a legislator, parliamentarians has a role to enact the climate change law or develops national adaptation plan or others plan, and they can monitor the gender sensitivity and not only formulation, also the implication or implementation in the across the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then I want to turn to a question that was asked by Silas from Rwanda, so one of the panelists, and he points out to something really true. It's a bit what Sohanur just said. He said it's not that women don't have a voice, they have a very loud voice. It's just that certain people don't want to listen to that voice. So, and the question of Silas now is, during some of the previous CSW events that I've attended this year, I've recognized the narrative that women must be included in or lead the combating of the climate crisis because of their natural, between quotes, caretaking abilities, whether that be in relation to people or the environment. But this narrative reinforces gender stereotypes. It's pushing women into that caring role, and that which we don't want to do. How can we fruitfully move beyond it in these discussions? Thank you. So it's really about the deconstruction there of these stereotypes. Vidar, I see you have raised your hand.
Thank you. Yes, there's a little small part of ecofeminism which is focusing on biology and arguing that women are caring and better at this because of their biology. I think one way first of all, the big part and the majority of all the ecofeminist knowledge and research and all of that is not saying that. It's looking at the structures and the stereotypes and the gender norms and how they are causing this fact that men are not caring as much. And I think one way to change this is to show that men can care, and for men to step up and start to care. And let go of those masculinity norms that tell us not to. That is a way to show that we are wanting to do this caring together. And of course, an important part of that caring is to give the mic, to give the floor, to give the room to women and girls and the ones who are oppressed. But not just give the floor, but also step up and do the caring and share that together. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, unfortunately, we only have 5 minutes left, so we need to round up this really, really interesting discussion that's developing with lots of interesting things being shared in the chat. So thank you all for doing that. Now, to round up, I just want to give 1 more minute to each of the panelists in just like 2 or 3 sentences. What is your takeaway of this session here today? Lotta, Sylwander, would you like to start, please?
Thank you. I think my takeaway is that we need to engage with men and women, of course, but men in a different way. We need to allow them opportunities to reconnect with nature, with the caring, with being fathers, with being connected in another different way. I think there was citation before. If you feel that you belong, then you become more caring and part of the whole thing. So that would be my biggest takeaway, and I think it is possible because I've seen it done, and I know that organizations like Men Engage can do it and can sort of penetrate this very difficult area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vidar, what is your takeaway?
Thank you. Yeah, I wasn't really ready. It's the power of everything that's been said here, that I really love how we're not talking about gender here and environment here, and then looking at how are they possibly linked, but actually looking at how they are totally interlinked, and how the patriarchal masculinity norms are root causes to the crisis, and the crisis are symptoms of that. The crying mayor in the Philippines, I think that's also one thing that parliamentarians need to do. Stop pretending that we can solve this easily. We need to also stop and actually cry and show how difficult this is. That would create real accountability, and we cannot move from one cup to the other and say, well, we have done what we can, let's meet next year and continue. You have to really feel this, and this mayor was a good example of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sohanur, what is your takeaway?
Yes, thank you, Katrin, for the last chance to share my takeaways. So especially the Ubuntu was opened my eyes. So it was a great chance to work with the Men Engage working group and to learn about the root cause for the climate crisis. So my takeaways is to share these hidden connection, or this knowledge, transform to knowledge to other young people who are still in crisis, men and boys, and also amplify their voice, unheard voice, and shifting the power to change the system. So it's my takeaways. Thank you. Over to you, Katrin.
Thank you. And then Samina Amin, please share your takeaway.
My takeaway is sort of framed with both gratitude and hope, because I think I'm always grateful for the chance to work together like this, because although we try to keep to our 5 minutes and our overall 1.5 hour event, it is through these connections that we keep working together through our emails, through our offline spaces as well, as much as possible to make change possible. And I say hope because I also, aside from having the privilege to work with Men Engage Alliance, I also work closely with the Women Human Rights Defenders International Coalition. And I think that that can be a difficult thing, to know how much environmental defenders are putting their lives on the line and dying to protect our territories and our planet. But so long as we are alive, we keep fighting. And I think to know what to fight for is also important. And as my co-panelists have said, it is about knowing how to feel and how to connect, and undoing that damage that patriarchy not just does to women and gender minorities, but to men as well, so that men can feel, and men and boys don't have to sort of shut down their emotions and become a destructive personality, but can embrace being part of a community. And I know that there's a question there about, how do we center care? There are a lot of policies out there that talk about these two things that I've just highlighted, but ultimately what it is about is not measuring how much money we are putting in the bank. It is about measuring how much we can care for each other and how much we can build something that is hopeful and that is lasting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And then the last word I give to Silas from Rwanda, please.
So my take home, allow me to quote His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Rwanda on International Women's Day tweet. It was, he said, I quote, "Equality is a right, not a favor. We must challenge ourselves to do even more and better to ensure that the next generations of our daughters and granddaughters inherit a nation where their aspirations have no limits." So I think benefits, what do we benefit from transformation? After the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, a genocide that was too patriarchal, I think we had no choice. We had no choice than making sure that everyone fully participate in the rebuilding of the country. And this was done through removing all those barriers from institutional level to individual behaviors and practices. So I think this can also be the same for even different countries, and it is a sustainable way of transforming masculinities. It is a sustainable way of addressing inequalities from the root causes of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we've come to the end of this session. I do hope that you have clicked on all the links that we shared in the chat so that you can look at them later on. Please also, this session is recorded in multiple languages and will be shared on our YouTube channel of Men Engage Alliance. So in a couple of days, you can find it on the channel, and please sign on to the call of action and look at the actions that we propose as well in the document that Vidar shared with all of you. So thank you very much. I wish you a very inspiring CSW with all the other events, and let's all stand shoulder to shoulder as allies, as humans, to care for this planet and make sure that we have a bright future ahead. And enjoy the weekend as well, and springtime for those of you who live in an area where springtime is coming. Bye-bye.